One country, dozens of missions, and a collection of special operations units so secretive, so specialized, and so feared that most people outside of Russia have never even heard their names. We are not talking about regular soldiers. We are not talking about standard infantry or conventional military forces. We are talking about units built specifically to do the things that no one else can do: hostage rescue in a burning building, counterterrorism raids in the dead of night, long-range reconnaissance deep behind enemy lines, underwater sabotage, direct action against high-value targets in denied territory, nuclear facility protection. These are the missions that define Spetsnaz, and today we are going inside every single one of those units: who they are, how they were built, what they actually do, and why they matter far beyond the borders of Russia. If you have always been curious about Russian special operations but never knew where to start, this is the video. Before we go any further, take 1 second and subscribe. Over 98% of people watching right now are not subscribed. It costs you absolutely nothing, but it means everything. Now let us get into it. First, let us settle something that trips people up every single time this topic comes up. Spetsnaz is not the name of one unit. It is not like saying Navy SEALs or Army Rangers and pointing to a single force. Spetsnaz is a Russian abbreviation. It stands for Vojska Specjalnego Nazначenia. In English, that translates directly to Forces of Special Purpose or Special Designation Forces. It is an umbrella term. It is a category. It describes any Russian military or security service unit that is classified as having a special or elite function. And what that means in practice is that Russia has many Spetsnaz units, plural, spread across multiple government agencies, military branches, and security structures. Some fall under the Ministry of Defense. Some fall under the Federal Security Service, which most people know as the FSB. Some fall under the Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR. Some fall under the National Guard. Some were built for very specific threats and exist in organizational shadows where their budget lines and command structures are deliberately difficult to trace. Understanding Russian special operations means understanding that the system is not a pyramid with one unit at the top. It is more like a web. Multiple elite forces, each with a distinct mission set, each answering to a different master, and each trained to standards that would break the vast majority of soldiers on Earth. So with that foundation in place, let us go unit by unit. Let us start with the most recognizable name in Russian special operations: Alpha Group. If you ask someone in Russia to name their most famous special operations unit, the answer will almost certainly be Alpha Group. And the reason for that is not propaganda or military marketing. It is history. Alpha Group has been at the center of some of the most dramatic and defining moments in modern Russian history, and many of those moments played out in front of the entire world. Officially, Alpha Group is known as Directorate A of the FSB Special Purpose Center. The FSB is the Federal Security Service of Russia, the primary domestic intelligence and security agency, and the direct institutional successor to the KGB. Alpha Group sits inside the FSB's Special Purpose Center, which is an umbrella command structure that houses several elite counterterrorism and direct action units. Alpha was created in 1974 during the Soviet era under KGB chairman Yuri Andropov. Its original mandate was hostage rescue and counterterrorism, and that mandate has never fundamentally changed. From the day it was formed, Alpha was built to handle the scenarios that conventional police or military forces simply are not equipped to manage: barricaded subjects, aircraft hijackings, embassy sieges, high-value target extractions, coordinated terrorist attacks on civilian infrastructure. The unit selection process is exceptionally demanding. Candidates must have prior military service, typically in airborne or other elite units. Physical standards are extreme, but what sets Alpha Group selection apart from purely physical programs is the psychological and intellectual evaluation component. Alpha operators are expected to make complex decisions under life or death stress in seconds, with incomplete information and with civilian lives directly on the line. That is a different kind of pressure than conventional combat, and the unit screens aggressively for the specific mental profile that can handle it. Alpha Group first became internationally known in 1979 when it led the assault on the Tajbeg Palace in Kabul during the Soviet invasion of Afghanistan. That operation, sometimes called Operation Storm 333, saw Alpha operators along with other Soviet special forces storm the presidential palace, neutralize Afghan President Hafizullah Amin, and effectively pave the way for the Soviet occupation of Afghanistan. It was a direct action mission executed with speed and violence of action that shocked military analysts who studied it afterward. Over the following decades, Alpha Group built a long operational record, but it was two events in the early 2000s that burned the unit's name permanently into global consciousness. The first was the Moscow Theater hostage crisis of October 2002. Chechen terrorists seized the Dubrovka Theater in Moscow, taking over 850 civilians hostage. After a standoff lasting several days, Alpha Group led the assault. Russian authorities pumped an aerosol chemical agent, widely believed to be a carfentanil derivative, through the theater's ventilation system before the operators moved in. The raid itself was decisive. The terrorists were eliminated, but the aftermath was deeply controversial. Over 130 hostages died, almost entirely from the effects of the chemical agent combined with inadequate medical preparation for the aftermath. The operation remains one of the most studied and debated counterterrorism actions in modern history, not for the assault itself, but for the strategic and medical decisions surrounding it. The second defining event was the Beslan school siege in September 2004. Chechen terrorists seized school number 1 in Beslan, North Ossetia, taking over 1,100 people hostage, the majority of them children. When the siege collapsed into chaos on the third day after explosions inside the school, Alpha Group operators moved into the building alongside other security forces to extract hostages and engage the terrorists. Over 330 people were killed, more than half of them children. The scale of the tragedy was staggering, and Alpha Group operators who survived the assault described it as the most psychologically devastating experience of their careers. Alpha Group operates today with a mission set that includes all forms of domestic counterterrorism, high-value target capture or elimination, hostage rescue, protective operations for key Russian government personnel, and coordination with FSB intelligence assets on active threat suppression. The unit is headquartered in Moscow and maintains a level of institutional prestige within Russia that is hard to overstate. Now let us talk about the unit that operates in parallel with Alpha inside the FSB Special Purpose Center. Vimpel Group. Vimpel means pennant in Russian, and like Alpha, Vimpel is one of the original elite Soviet special operations units, created in 1981 by the KGB. But where Alpha was built primarily for domestic counterterrorism and hostage rescue, Vimpel was created for something quite different. Its original mandate was foreign special operations. Deep penetration missions behind enemy lines in wartime, sabotage of critical infrastructure in hostile countries, elimination of key enemy personnel, and most significantly, operations against nuclear facilities and nuclear command structures in the event of war with NATO. That last point is worth letting sink in. Vimpel operators were specifically trained to locate, penetrate, and destroy nuclear weapons facilities and command nodes in enemy territory during wartime. They were also trained to protect Russian nuclear facilities from enemy special operations teams attempting to do the same thing. This made Vimpel one of the most strategically significant units in the Soviet special operations structure, because in a conflict between nuclear powers, the ability to neutralize the enemy's nuclear command and control infrastructure could determine the outcome of the entire war. Vimpel went through significant organizational turbulence after the Soviet collapse. It was briefly transferred to the Ministry of Internal Affairs, which was entirely mismatched with the unit's training and culture. Vimpel operators essentially refused to function in a domestic law enforcement role. The unit was eventually transferred to the FSB and reconstituted as Directorate V of the FSB Special Purpose Center, where it sits today. In its modern form, Vimpel's mission set includes counterterrorism, protection of Russian nuclear facilities and other strategic infrastructure against terrorist or enemy special operations threats, and continuing to maintain elements of the foreign direct action capability that defined the unit in its Soviet years. Vimpel operators train extensively in infiltration techniques, both airborne insertion and maritime approaches, explosive demolition and counter-demolition, and the kind of sustained operations in denied environments that require operators to function independently for extended periods with no external support. The unit works closely with Alpha Group, and the two are often deployed together on complex operations that require both direct action and specialized technical capabilities. Let us now move outside the FSB structure entirely and talk about one of the most elite and least discussed units in the Russian military, the GRU Spetsnaz. When most serious analysts and military professionals talk about Russian special operations at the strategic level, this is the capability that commands the most respect and often the most concern. The GRU is Russia's Military Intelligence Directorate. Its full name in Russian is Glavnoy Razvedivatelnoy Upravleniy, or Main Intelligence Directorate. And unlike the FSB, which is primarily a domestic security service, the GRU is focused outward. It is Russia's primary military foreign intelligence organization, responsible for collecting intelligence on foreign militaries, foreign governments, and foreign threats. The GRU Spetsnaz units that operate under its command reflect that outward focus. These are not domestic counterterrorism forces. They are strategic military reconnaissance and direct action units designed to operate deep inside foreign territory, in wartime and during peacetime operations that fall in the gray zone between war and peace. GRU Spetsnaz brigades are organized into brigades and separate detachments, spread across Russia's military districts. Each military district maintains its own GRU Spetsnaz units, aligned with the operational geography that district is responsible for. In a general war scenario, these units would deploy deep into enemy territory, ahead of conventional forces, to perform strategic reconnaissance of enemy military dispositions, locate and designate targets for strikes by Russian missiles or air assets, sabotage enemy logistics networks and command nodes, and conduct direct action against high-value military targets. but the GRU Spetsnaz mission set extends well beyond conventional war scenarios. These units are trained and equipped for what Russian military doctrine calls special reconnaissance and special operations in peacetime, which is essentially a formal acknowledgement that GRU Spetsnaz operates across the entire spectrum of conflict, including during periods when Russia is not officially at war with anyone. The relevance of this point became very clear to the world in 2014. The small green men who appeared in Crimea during Russia's annexation of the peninsula, moving with military precision, carrying modern weapons, wearing uniforms with no insignia, were widely identified as including GRU Spetsnaz elements. Their mission was not conventional combat. It was seizing key infrastructure, controlling movement, and creating conditions on the ground that allowed Russia to consolidate control before a conventional military response could be organized. It was a masterclass in the gray zone operations that GRU Spetsnaz trained specifically to execute. GRU Spetsnaz operators train across an extraordinarily wide skill set: long-range parachute insertion, often halo and HAHO techniques that allow infiltration from very high altitudes, maritime infiltration from submarines or surface vessels, extended survival and movement in denied territory without resupply, advanced communications and signals intelligence collection, combat demolition, direct action in small units against hardened targets, language and cultural training relevant to their assigned operational theater. The physical and mental demands of GRU Spetsnaz selection and training are considered among the most severe in the Russian military. The famous Soviet-era physical tests, including the ability to complete grueling endurance events and hand-to-hand combat assessments, have roots in GRU Spetsnaz training culture, and those standards have been maintained and evolved in the modern force. Now let us talk about a unit that most people have genuinely never heard of, even among those who follow Russian military affairs closely: Spetsnaz. The Special Operations Forces of the Russian Armed Forces, often referred to by the name of their training center, Spetsnaz, represent Russia's attempt to build a dedicated Special Operations Command structure that mirrors what the United States achieved with the creation of SOCOM, the Special Operations Command. For most of the post-Soviet period, Russia lacked a unified Special Operations Command. Its various Spetsnaz units were distributed across different agencies and military branches with no single command authority coordinating their development, training standards, or operational employment. That began to change significantly after 2012, when Russia started a deliberate effort to build a true Special Operations Forces Command. The Special Operations Forces Command, in Russian Komandovanie Sil Spetsialnych Operatsii, was formally established and equipped with its own dedicated training base at Spetsnaz, northwest of Moscow. The unit that trains there is sometimes called the SSO, for Sili Spetsialnych Operatsii, meaning Special Operations Forces. These operators represent Russia's closest analog to Tier 1 units in Western special operations structures, the most demanding selection, the most advanced training, the broadest mission set. Operators assigned to Spetsnaz come from across the Russian military, typically with significant prior service in airborne or other elite units. Selection is multi-phase and eliminates a significant percentage of candidates. Training covers the full spectrum of special operations skills, including direct action, special reconnaissance, unconventional warfare, military information operations, and working by, with, and through partner forces. The unit has been employed in Ukraine, Syria, and in other operational environments where Russia seeks to exert influence through means short of conventional military force. These are the operators that Russian military leadership is investing in as the foundation of a more capable, more flexible, and more globally deployable special operations force for the future. Please take a second right now and like this video. It genuinely helps more people find this content. Now let us talk about the Russian airborne forces and their Spetsnaz components, because this is an area where confusion is extremely common. The VDV and airborne Spetsnaz. The VDV, short for Vzdushno-Desantnye Vojska or airborne troops, are one of Russia's most prestigious and historically celebrated military branches. They trace their origins back to the 1930s, when the Soviet Union pioneered large-scale military parachute operations, and they have maintained an elite status within the Russian military ever since. The VDV is not itself a Spetsnaz structure. It is a conventional military branch that specializes in airborne and air assault operations. But within the VDV, and closely associated with it, are Spetsnaz units that take the airborne capabilities of the VDV and layer special operations training and missions on top of them. The 45th Guards Special Purpose Airborne Regiment, based near Moscow, is the most prominent example. The regiment is the primary special operations unit directly within the VDV structure. Its operators are trained to perform strategic reconnaissance and direct action missions in airborne insertion scenarios, moving deep into enemy territory by parachute to execute objectives that conventional VDV forces are not equipped for. The 45th Guards Regiment has been deployed in essentially every major Russian military operation of the post-Soviet era: Afghanistan in the final Soviet years, the Chechen Wars, the 2008 war with Georgia. The operations in Ukraine beginning in 2014 and intensifying dramatically in 2022. Syria, where Russian Special Operations Forces played a significant role in supporting Syrian government forces and in direct action against high-value targets. The regiment's operators trained to exceptionally high physical standards, and the unit carries significant institutional prestige within both the VDV and the broader Russian military. There are also Spetsnaz reconnaissance companies organic to individual VDV divisions and brigades. These smaller units provide the divisional and brigade commanders with dedicated special reconnaissance assets, extending their situational awareness beyond what conventional reconnaissance elements can achieve. Let us now move to one of the most operationally active and in some respects most misunderstood elements of Russian special operations: the Rosgvardia Spetsnaz. In 2016, Russian President Vladimir Putin signed into existence a new federal security force with no real precedent in Russian organizational history. The National Guard of Russia, formerly called the Federal Service of the National Guard Troops, or in Russian Rosgvardia, was created by consolidating several existing internal security forces under a unified command that reports directly to the president, bypassing the normal chain of command through the Ministry of Internal Affairs. The creation of Rosgvardia immediately transferred several existing Spetsnaz units into its structure. Two of the most significant are OMON and SOBR. OMON stands for Otriad Mobilny Osobogo Nazначenia, which translates roughly to Special Purpose Mobile Unit or Special Purpose Police Unit. OMON units exist in every major Russian city and region. They are heavily armed, trained to significantly higher standards than conventional Russian police, and are employed in public order operations, counterterrorism support, and serious crime response. If you have seen images of Russian security forces in full gear conducting operations, you have almost certainly seen OMON. They are ubiquitous in Russian security operations, and their blue camouflage and distinctive gear make them recognizable. But OMON should not be confused with truly elite special operations forces. Their mission is primarily police special operations, meaning they handle situations that exceed the capacity of regular police, but fall below the threshold requiring military intervention. Riot control in its most violent and dangerous forms, hostage situations where the threat level requires armed response but not necessarily military-grade direct action capabilities, counter-organized crime operations against armed and dangerous subjects. SOBR is a different matter. SOBR stands for Specjalny Otriad Bystrogo Reagировania, meaning Special Rapid Response Unit. SOBR units are significantly smaller than OMON, more selective in their membership, and trained to a higher individual standard. Their mission set overlaps with OMON in some areas but extends further into genuine special operations territory: counter-narcotics raids, anti-organized crime direct action, counter-terrorism support, close protection of key officials. SOBR was originally created in the early 1990s, specifically to combat the extraordinary wave of organized crime that swept through Russia after the Soviet collapse, when criminal organizations operated with near-total impunity and Russian law enforcement lacked the tools to counter them. Over time, SOBR evolved into a versatile rapid response force that is deployed across a very wide range of serious threat scenarios. Within the Rosgvardia structure, there are also dedicated special operations units with more clearly military-grade capabilities, including units that participate in counterterrorism planning and execution alongside FSB assets. The Rosgvardia's importance in the overall Russian security architecture should not be underestimated. It represents a direct action force of considerable size that reports to the president personally, which in the context of Russian political history and the concerns Russian leadership has historically maintained about internal stability, is a very significant organizational choice. Now let us talk about a unit that combines two disciplines most people would not immediately connect: water and war, PDSS. In Russian, PDSS stands for Prodavody Verzheny Sili I Sredstva, which translates to anti-sabotage forces and means. And the name tells you exactly what these operators do. They operate underwater. They protect Russian naval assets from enemy combat divers and underwater saboteurs, and they conduct offensive combat diving operations in support of broader military objectives. The PDSS units are organic to the Russian Navy, with detachments assigned to major naval bases and fleet headquarters. Their mission is structured around two core functions. Defensive operations focus on protecting Russian ships, submarines, and port facilities from enemy frogmen, underwater explosive charges, and any other threat that approaches from beneath the surface. Offensive operations extend to combat swimming missions in direct support of amphibious operations, underwater reconnaissance of hostile ports or beach landing zones, and the placement of underwater demolition charges on enemy naval assets. PDSS operators train extensively in closed-circuit rebreather diving systems, which produce no visible exhaust bubbles and allow divers to approach targets without detection. They are trained in underwater navigation, the placement and neutralization of mines and explosive charges, and combat techniques specific to the underwater environment. Russian naval Spetsnaz capabilities in the underwater domain have been a subject of significant interest and concern for NATO naval planners, particularly given Russia's demonstrated interest in the vulnerability of undersea infrastructure, including communication cables and pipeline systems. There is a broader Russian naval Spetsnaz structure that extends beyond PDSS. The Russian Navy has maintained dedicated marine special operations units, sometimes called Morskaya Razvedka or Naval Reconnaissance, that are tasked with maritime direct action and reconnaissance missions in support of fleet operations. These units train in maritime insertion techniques, including submarine lockout procedures, closed-circuit diving, and small boat operations, and they maintain skills across the full range of special operations disciplines in addition to their maritime specialization. Now let us talk about a subject that is both fascinating and deeply important to understanding how Russian special operations actually function in the modern world: the line between military intelligence and deniable operations. One of the most significant features of the Russian Spetsnaz ecosystem is the degree to which it is designed to operate in spaces that conventional military forces cannot inhabit legally, politically, or diplomatically. Russian strategic doctrine, which military theorists in the West often refer to under the term sometimes called New Generation Warfare or Hybrid Warfare, explicitly envisions the use of special operations forces in ways that blur the boundary between war and peace, between military and civilian, and between state and non-state actors. GRU Spetsnaz and SSO operators are trained to work through proxy forces, training and equipping local armed groups to pursue Russian strategic objectives without Russian forces needing to appear in the conflict directly. They are trained to conduct information operations that shape the battlefield before a single shot is fired. They are trained to seize and hold key terrain and infrastructure during the opening hours of an operation in ways that create facts on the ground before the international community can respond effectively. The Crimea operation in 2014 was the most visible demonstration of these principles in action. The Donbass operation that followed in eastern Ukraine demonstrated a further evolution, with Russian special operations personnel embedded with and advising local separatist forces in ways that were deniable at the political level while being operationally decisive. Syria provided yet another environment where Russian special operations forces operated in advisory, direct action, and reconnaissance roles across a complex battlefield involving multiple state and non-state actors simultaneously. Understanding Russian Spetsnaz means understanding that these units are not just tactical tools. They are instruments of strategic policy, employed across the full spectrum of what Russian doctrine considers conflict, which begins well before the first conventional military engagement and continues well after any conventional military operation concludes. Let us now discuss the selection and training culture that runs across Russian Spetsnaz units, because understanding what these men go through to earn the right to serve helps explain why they are capable of the things they do. Selection and training. Russian Spetsnaz selection, while it varies by unit, shares certain foundational characteristics that distinguish it from both conventional Russian military training and from the selection processes of most other militaries in the world. Physical standards are extreme. This is not a characterization or an exaggeration. Soviet-era Spetsnaz training developed a reputation for brutality that was not simply propaganda. The training methodology was built on the premise that an operator who has survived genuine physical and psychological extremity during preparation will perform better when confronted with extremity in the field. Common elements of Russian Spetsnaz selection and initial training include extended endurance events covering distances of 50 to 100 kilometers or more with full equipment, often under time constraints that leave no margin for error. Sleep deprivation extended over multiple days, during which candidates must continue to perform tasks requiring physical exertion and cognitive function. Cold water immersion in training environments that replicate the conditions of winter operations, which in Russia's operational geography are not a hypothetical scenario but a operational certainty. Hand-to-hand combat training that is genuine and demanding, with the Russian military martial arts system known as Systema being influential in some unit training cultures, alongside more conventional combat sports including wrestling, sambo, and boxing. Marksmanship training at a standard that qualifies operators to engage targets effectively under conditions of extreme physical fatigue, poor visibility, and psychological stress. Land navigation over extended distances in unfamiliar terrain without the aid of GPS, because Spetsnaz operators must be capable of functioning when electronic systems are unavailable or compromised. Demolition and explosive ordnance training, which for units like Vimpel with a historical focus on infrastructure sabotage and protection, is particularly extensive. Parachute training for units with airborne insertion missions, including both conventional static line jumps and the more complex free-fall techniques used for high-altitude insertions designed to evade radar detection. The training culture in Russian Spetsnaz also emphasizes a degree of individual initiative and problem-solving that is sometimes characterized as inconsistent with the stereotype of rigid Soviet military discipline. The best Russian Spetsnaz units understand that special operations in denied environments require operators who can think, adapt, and make correct decisions when their plan has made contact with reality and reality has won. That said, Russian Spetsnaz training culture is not identical to Western special operations training culture, and the differences matter. The emphasis on individual resilience and collective unit identity sometimes comes at the expense of the kind of meticulous planning process and mission rehearsal that Western special operations forces consider non-negotiable. Russian Spetsnaz culture has historically emphasized operator toughness as a primary virtue. Western special operations culture has evolved toward emphasizing preparation, planning, and rehearsal as equally critical to operator toughness. Neither approach is without merit and neither is without weakness. Now let us talk about a unit that carries one of the most recognized names in Russian special operations, but is often misunderstood in terms of what it actually does. Zaslan. Zaslan is the special operations unit of the SVR, Russia's Foreign Intelligence Service, the SVR being the external intelligence organization that is in institutional terms the successor to the KGB's first chief directorate. If the FSB is Russia's FBI plus domestic intelligence service equivalent, then the SVR is Russia's CIA equivalent, responsible for collecting intelligence on foreign governments, foreign militaries, foreign economic and technological developments, and foreign threats to Russian national interests from sources and methods outside of Russia's borders. Zaslan, whose name translates roughly to barrier or shield, was created to provide the SVR with a direct action capability that intelligence services operating in foreign environments sometimes require. The unit's existence was acknowledged by Russian authorities in the early 2000s, though the specifics of its size, organization, and operational history remain among the most closely held secrets in the Russian intelligence community. What is understood about Zaslan is that its operators are trained to a standard consistent with other Russian Tier 1 special operations forces, and that the unit's mission set includes the protection of SVR personnel and operations in hostile foreign environments, direct action support for SVR intelligence operations when nonviolent means are insufficient or impractical, and operations that blur the boundary between intelligence collection and covert direct action in ways that provide the Russian state with strategic options that conventional military or standard intelligence means cannot deliver. Zaslan operators are believed to be recruited primarily from other Russian special operations and military intelligence units, bringing existing high-level training and operational experience into the SVR's specific operational context. The unit is small by design because its value lies in capability concentration and operational discretion rather than mass. If you are finding this breakdown useful, hit the like button right now. It takes 1 second and it makes a genuine difference. Now let us talk about the Spetsnaz units that exist within Russia's military district and combined arms army structures, because these are the units that have actually fought in the largest volume of Russian military operations over the past 3 decades, and they deserve more attention than they typically receive in discussions focused exclusively on the most elite or most well-known Russian special operations forces, military district and army-level Spetsnaz. Within each of Russia's military districts and combined arms armies, there are dedicated Spetsnaz units that exist specifically to support the operational and tactical commanders' requirements for special reconnaissance and direct action capability. These units are distinct from both the GRU Spetsnaz brigades operating at the strategic level and from the FSB or SVR units operating in the national counterterrorism and intelligence missions. They are operational-level special operations forces. Their mission is to see deep into the enemy's operational depth, identifying key targets, reporting on enemy dispositions and movements, and when required, conducting direct action against targets whose destruction or capture would meaningfully support the conventional military operation. These units have been the workhorses of Russian Spetsnaz in every major conflict. In the First Chechen War from 1994 to 1996, where Russian conventional military performance was often poor and embarrassing by the standards the Russian military had set for itself, The Spetsnaz elements operating in Chechnya conducted some of the few operations that achieved their objectives against a determined and skilled enemy fighting on its home terrain. In the Second Chechen War from 1999 to 2009, Russian Special Operations Forces were employed with considerably greater effectiveness and coordination, and the lessons of the First War's failures were applied with meaningful results. In the 2008 war with Georgia, Russian Spetsnaz units were among the first to move, and were employed in roles that shaped the operational environment before conventional forces closed with the enemy. In Ukraine, beginning with the covert operations of 2014 and escalating dramatically with the full-scale invasion of February 2022, military district and army-level Spetsnaz units have been involved across every phase and every axis of the conflict. The performance record in Ukraine has been uneven, as it has been for Russian military forces broadly, and significant losses have been reported among Spetsnaz units that were in some cases employed in roles inconsistent with their training and doctrine, suffering casualties in direct assaults that could have been avoided with different operational choices. This is a pattern that military historians who study Russian Spetsnaz will recognize from previous conflicts. The institutional tendency to employ elite special operations forces in roles suited to conventional infantry is a recurring problem that reflects the gap between doctrine and the pressure of operational requirements in a complex and dynamic fight. Now let us take a broader view and talk about something that is critical to actually understanding the power and the limits of Russian Spetsnaz: the relationship between capability and political context. The capability is real. Let us be clear about that. Russian Spetsnaz units, the best of them, are genuinely elite military organizations. Their selection standards are genuinely demanding. Their training is genuinely comprehensive. Their operational history demonstrates genuine capability across a wide range of missions in complex environments against capable enemies. But capability in military special operations is always exercised within a political and institutional context that either amplifies or degrades that capability. In Russia's case, several contextual factors shape how Spetsnaz capability is actually employed and what it can realistically achieve. The first factor is the relationship between special operations and intelligence. The best special operations in the world are built on excellent intelligence. Intelligence tells the operators where to go, what they will find when they get there, what the enemy knows, and what the consequences of success or failure will be. Russian intelligence, despite having some genuinely sophisticated collection and analysis capabilities, has demonstrated significant failures in the Ukrainian theater in particular, with assessments of enemy strength, will to fight, and popular support that proved badly wrong, and that led to operational plans that were not matched to the actual conditions on the ground. Special operations forces can only work with the intelligence picture they are given. If that picture is wrong, even the best operators will find themselves in situations that were not anticipated and for which their training did not specifically prepare them. The second factor is command culture. Russian military command culture has historically concentrated decision-making authority at higher levels than is ideal for special operations. Spetsnaz operators who need to make rapid decisions in fluid environments are sometimes constrained by a command structure that requires authority to be sought upward before action can be taken. And in the tempo of modern special operations, that latency between decision and action can be the difference between mission success and mission failure. The third factor is logistics and sustainment. Russian special operations forces in sustained operations have faced the same logistics challenges that have plagued Russian conventional forces, with supply chains that proved less reliable in practice than they appeared on paper. Elite training means very little if operators cannot be resupplied with ammunition, fuel, and medical support at the pace that combat operations demand. These are not arguments that Russian Spetsnaz is not capable or not dangerous. They are arguments that capability divorced from its context tells an incomplete story. The full story requires understanding both what these units can do and the conditions under which they are being asked to do it. Let us now come back to something that is important for understanding where Russian special operations are going in the future, because the picture is not static. Evolution and the future of Russian Spetsnaz. The Russian military has been in a process of significant self-examination and attempted reform since at least the 2008 war with Georgia, which exposed serious structural weaknesses even as it demonstrated some real capabilities. That process of reform accelerated after the early phases of the Ukraine conflict revealed further gaps between doctrine and operational reality. In the special operations domain specifically, Russia has invested in several areas that are worth understanding. The expansion and professionalization of the SSO, the Special Operations Forces Command built around the Spetsnaz Training Center, represents an attempt to create a genuinely world-class special operations capability that is organized, trained, and equipped according to modern special operations principles rather than Soviet-era doctrine. That investment has produced real improvements in capability, though the pace of those improvements has not always matched the pace of operational demands. Russian investment in non-kinetic and information operations capabilities that complement and enhance Spetsnaz kinetic operations has also been significant. The integration of electronic warfare, cyber operations, information operations, and psychological operations with special operations ground force missions is an area where Russian doctrine has been innovative, and where the application of those innovations in real operational environments has provided data and lessons that continue to drive further development. The use of private military companies, most notably the Wagner Group before its dramatic 2023 events and the subsequent reorganization of those forces, represented another evolution in how Russia employs special operations adjacent capabilities. Wagner's relationship with GRU and other Russian military intelligence structures was complex, and at times contentious, but it provided Russia with a mechanism to employ highly capable fighters in environments where official Russian military presence carried political costs. The long-term organizational implications of the Wagner Group's rise and fall for Russian special operations are still being worked out, and the reintegration or reorganization of those capabilities into the official Russian military structure is an ongoing process. The honest assessment of Russian Spetsnaz, looking forward, is that these are real military capabilities being operated by a military that is simultaneously fighting a large-scale conventional war, attempting to absorb lessons from that war and apply them in real time, and trying to manage the institutional and human costs of that war in ways that preserve long-term capability. Elite units take years to build, and they can be degraded much faster than they can be rebuilt. The actual state of Russian Spetsnaz capability as of this moment reflects all of those pressures simultaneously. Let us now bring everything together and give you the complete picture in terms that are clear and memorable. Here's what you now know. Alpha Group and Vimpel are the FSB's primary counterterrorism and direct action units, trained for the most sensitive and dangerous domestic and near-abroad missions. Alpha focuses on hostage rescue and counterterrorism response. Vimpel brings a legacy of strategic infrastructure operations and nuclear facility expertise that remains relevant today. GRU Spetsnaz represents the Military Intelligence Directorate's strategic and operational special operations capability, built for deep reconnaissance, direct action, and the gray zone operations that have defined Russian strategic behavior in the post-Soviet era. The SSO at Spetsnaz represents Russia's attempt to build a Tier 1 direct action capability that matches the best in the world, organized and trained according to modern special operations principles, and designed for employment across the full spectrum of conflict in any environment on Earth. The 45th Guards Special Purpose Airborne Regiment and the broader VDV-associated Spetsnaz elements provide airborne special operations capability integrated with Russia's premier conventional airborne force, enabling rapid insertion and direct action in scenarios that combine conventional and special operations elements. OMON and SOBR within the Rosgvardia provide police special operations and rapid response capabilities across the full range of serious domestic and near-abroad security threats, with SOBR representing a significantly higher capability threshold than OMON in terms of selection standards and mission complexity. PDSS and Naval Spetsnaz provide the Russian Navy with underwater direct action, anti-sabotage and maritime reconnaissance capabilities relevant to both the protection of Russian naval assets and the conduct of offensive underwater operations. Zaslan provides the SVR with a covert direct action and protection capability that enables the Foreign Intelligence Service to operate in environments where standard intelligence tradecraft alone is insufficient. And across military district and army structures throughout Russia's military organization, dedicated operational-level Spetsnaz units provide conventional military commanders with special reconnaissance and direct action assets that have been employed in every significant Russian military operation of the past 30 years. That is the ecosystem. That is the web, not one unit, not one command, not one mission. A distributed, multi-layered collection of specialized forces, each built for specific purposes, each answering to different masters, and each contributing to a Russian special operations capability that is real, that is dangerous, and that is actively shaping events on multiple continents at this very moment. Now here is something worth sitting with for a moment: the men who serve in these units. Whatever one thinks of Russian foreign policy, whatever judgment is rendered on the decisions made by Russia's political leadership, the individual operators who pass selection, who complete training, who deploy on missions in environments where mistakes cost lives, these are human beings who have committed themselves to a demanding and dangerous vocation in service of something larger than themselves. The training they endure is brutal. The missions they are sent on carry extraordinary risk. The deployments separate them from families and from the ordinary rhythms of life that most people take entirely for granted. This does not make their actions immune from moral judgment. Military forces are accountable for what they do, not just for how hard they train to do it. But it means that understanding Spetsnaz requires understanding the human dimension alongside the organizational and doctrinal dimensions. These are not robots or automatons. They are trained, experienced, and often genuinely motivated soldiers operating inside an institutional and political structure that is not of their making. The last thing to understand about Russian Spetsnaz, the thing that pulls everything else together, is this. Special operations forces are a reflection of the strategic culture and the strategic ambitions of the state that builds and employs them. Russia has built a broad, diverse, and in many respects genuinely capable special operations ecosystem because Russia's strategic culture prizes the ability to operate across the full spectrum of conflict, to shape environments before conventional forces arrive, to achieve strategic objectives through means that are deniable, flexible, and difficult for adversaries to counter through conventional military responses. That ambition and the forces built to pursue it will continue to shape the security environment in Europe, the Middle East, Africa, and beyond for years to come. Understanding these units, their history, their missions, their strengths, and their very real limits is not just a matter of military curiosity. It is a prerequisite for understanding some of the most consequential events happening in the world right now. And now you understand them. If you learned something from this breakdown, hit the like button and subscribe so you never miss a video like this one. More deep dives into the forces, units, and strategies shaping the modern world are coming, and you do not want to miss them.